Welcome to my mid-year check-in. Just like the title suggests, I am going to be going over what I have accomplished this year so far. The speed at which the year has gone by thus far is certainly giving me whiplash. Whiplash. So it is good for me to sit down and see if I am on schedule to complete my 2025 goals. Keeping my fingers crossed, I am. Between January 1st and June 30th, I spent 558 hours going after my 2025 goals, which is actually 159 hours less than what I completed last year. And honestly, that is fine by me because that probably means that I have slept 159 hours more than I did last year. So when my goals are broken down into my weekly task, I have spent 281 hours working on my novel, which interestingly enough is actually 31 hours more than I did last year. When it comes to my academic writing, I spent 79 and a half hours on my academic work, and that is 31 hours less than what I completed last year. So I'm going to say that I kept the same amount of hours in terms of writing generally. However, I spent more hours working on my novel than I did on my academic writing, and I'll explain a little bit more in details about what exactly I did for my novel writing and what I did for my academic writing this year so far. I spent 48 hours and 30 minutes reading novels, which is 51 and a half hours less than what I read last year. I spent 27 hours and 30 minutes reading academic texts, which is 10 3/4 of an hour less than what I did last year. I spent 13 hours writing my social media scripts, which is 25 3/4 of an hour less than what I did last year. And then 55 hours editing content for social media, and that is about 55 and a half hours less than what I did last year. When it comes to my Korean language learning, specifically my self-study learning, I spent 42 and a half hours of self-study, which is 21 and a half hours less than what I did last year. And then for my Korean language learning class, I spent 11 hours in class or in my tutoring sessions, which is actually 1 hour more than what I completed last year. So that is a win. When I am looking at my full calendar for the first 6 months of the year, I can see that my most productive week was February 17th through the 23rd, with 32 hours towards my goals, while my least productive week was actually last week, June 23rd through the 30th. And that's because that was my last week in Korea, and I had so much to get done before I left. And so a lot of kind of my writing and my reading time was co-opted by me doing a lot of the research that I still needed to get done. And speaking of Korea, my hope is to have my research video out to you by next month, so stay tuned for that. So during that last week, I was only able to accomplish 5.5 hours of task. And again, that is because there was so much I still had to get done while I was there. When I organize these hours according to my 4 tasks, which is writing, reading, content creation, and Korean studying, I spent 373 and a half hours writing, 76 hours reading, 55 hours on content creation, and 53 and a half hours studying Korean. And from these totals, I can see that my most kind of dominant task was writing, which is the clear winner, which again is my main priority in terms of how I organize my tasks. So that is a win. So when it comes to the 281 hours of novel writing, a huge majority of that has been spent working on the 4th draft? The 4th draft of my YA contemporary fiction manuscript that I have been calling Project Soul, which as of June 30th sits at about 86,000 words. And it's interesting because this time last year, I was on my first draft, and that was at 54,000 words. So it's actually really great to see how much progress I have made over the course of this year. I am on track to have a completed draft, a completed fourth draft by October. I do want to participate in Smooch Pit. And if you've never heard of Smooch Pit, it is a mentorship program that is for romance and / romance adjacent novelists. If you follow Meredith E. Phillips, she is an author tuber in this space. She participated in Smooch Pit last year. She actually has a video detailing her experience, so I will leave a link of her video in the description box below, as well as a link to the website, so that way you can find more information, just in case that you also want to participate. I do have a deadline of August 15th to send my editor my query letter and my synopsis so that she can give me feedback so that I will have enough time to do any kind of edits before submitting to Smooch Pit. I do have a completed draft of both my query letter and my synopsis. I will be spending the next week or so tweaking it before sending it off to her. So some of those 281 hours were spent working on my query letter as well as my synopsis. And lastly, I did give a reading at UCSD earlier this year in April. So some of my hours were also spent going over the middle grade excerpt that I had read for that particular reading. So that is all that I have accomplished for my 281 hours of novel writing this year so far. Now, when it comes to my academic writing, I spent 79.5 hours working on chapter 1 of my monograph, working on 2 articles, 2 presentations, and 1 workshop. I got to about 4,000 words of the chapter 1 of my monograph, but then completely abandoned it after that. So I am now off on my timeline of completing my monograph. I do need to just sit down this summer and recreate a schedule so that way I can get back on track and finish that chapter. As for one of my articles, I did submit that to the Girlhood Studies Journal. It is a revise and accept, so it was given back to me. I'm going to be making some revisions. My revisions aren't actually due until this time next summer. It will be my article will be published in the December 2026 journal. However, I do need to send my revision plan to the editor by next week, so I will be spending some time working on that. But for now, in terms of the revisions, they're not due until next year. So I do have some time before I have to finish working on that article. But I'm really excited because Girlhood Studies Journal is like my pinnacle of career validation. So I am looking forward to having my next article published with them. Now for my second article, I'm very, very close to it being done. This particular article, I think, has about 4,500 words. Yes, 4,500 words. I am on the 3rd/4th draft of it. The max length for the journal is 6,500 words. I probably have about 1,000 words left to write. I do need to provide a little bit of more primary sources from my primary text to the article, as well as kind of beef up my conclusion. So once I do that, then the article will be done and I'll be able to send that off. My original plan was to have that article done by August. However, it is currently July 5th. I highly doubt that I will have it done by the end of August. So I'm going to give myself until September, latest end of October to have that article done and then be able to send it off. I feel like that is more of a realistic timeline for me. The 2 presentations that I worked on, one was in March and the other one was in April, and they both went really, really well, thank goodness. The first presentation was a virtual presentation that I gave to the Minnesota Department of Human Services, and because it went so well, they actually invited me to be one of their spring lecturers for next year. So I'll also be either coming up with a new presentation or using one of my current chapters from my monograph as another kind of insight into my work that I can then present for their spring 2026 lecture series. The other presentation that I gave was in person, and that was to the Minnesota History Center. That presentation is based on the second article that I just mentioned. That particular article is looking at girl activists and what I'm calling BLM protest literature. So I gave a kind of synopsis presentation about the argument that I'm making in that article, which was really lovely to have a kind of moment of reflection and obviously audience feedback and questions that are then going to help me make those kind of final changes to the article before it's ready for submission. Because my presentation went really well, they're actually hoping to have me back potentially in 2028, and this is depending on their exhibit cycles. This original presentation, or this presentation that I had just done in April, was connected to the traveling girlhood exhibit that they received from the Smithsonian. And so depending on their 2028 cycle, there is a possibility that my research also coincides with what they might be bringing in. So the hope is that I'll also be able to give a presentation dedicated to one of their 2028 exhibit cycles. And then the workshop that I gave was also connected to the Minnesota History Center. They had specifically a teacher's workshop that was given that I gave prior to my presentation. And that was for the K through 12 educators looking to bring more narratives about Black girlhood into their classrooms. And that also went really well. So regarding content creation, when it comes to YouTube, I really wanted to post a video a month, but it seems here in my notes that I actually haven't posted a video since late April. I'm going to admit May was rough with the end of the semester and graduation, and then at the end of the month I'd left for Korea and had been gone for all of June and just got back. So between the jet lag and working on the research video in Korea, I just have not had the opportunity to be able to meet the schedule, but my hope is that before the end of the year, I will have 12 videos, seeing that I am only 2 videos down and I have lots of ideas percolating, that I will have been able to meet this goal by the end of the year, even though I wasn't able to release a video a month. Let's just say as long as I have 12 videos published by the end of the year, I will count this goal as being done well. So it seems that I currently have 458 subscribers on YouTube. If you are a subscriber, thank you for subscribing. If you're not a subscriber, go ahead and hit that subscribe button now. One of my highlights from YouTube this year is that I actually got a shout out from one of my favorite author tubers, Lindsay Puckett. She actually found my 70 Hard for Writers challenge and has made some modifications, but is also doing the challenge currently along with some of her other author tuber friends. So if you don't know Lindsay Puckett, I will go ahead and link her 75 Hard video in the description box below, and that way you can go ahead and follow her journey towards her publications. On Instagram, it seems that I have only posted 36 times this year, which is 30 posts less than last year. But let's be honest, the world is on fire and I have not want to be doom scrolling on Instagram, so I am on it less, which means I am posting less, but that probably also means that my mental health is a little bit better than it was this time last year if I haven't been scrolling and posting on Instagram. But despite posting less, I actually have gained 91 followers in the past year. I currently have 341 subscribers, which for me, I'm in such a small niche, is not bad. I do want to post more regularly on Instagram, but again, I'm okay with not meeting the exact goal that I had. But I do post more on Instagram than I do on YouTube. So if you are not following me on Instagram, I say go ahead and give me a follow. So for my novel reading, I spent 48.5 hours reading novels. It seems that I've read 5 young adult novels and 2 middle grade novels this year so far, which is essentially a book a month. Last year, I was reading 2 books a month, so I am reading 1 book less this month. but I'm really not worried about the amount just because of the amount of work and tasks that I try to complete on a weekly basis in conjunction with my full-time job as a professor. So I'm just grateful that I do make sure that I am spending some time reading and keeping up with what is happening in the children's literature industry. I will record a mid-year wrap-up, but since we are already in July, it might end up being an end-of-year wrap-up. But either way, stay tuned for my next ranking video so that you can see what I have been reading. When it comes to my academic text, I read A Girl Stands at the Door by Rachel Devlin. I highly recommend. Great book. It's actually a book that looks at how Black girls were super influential and important in terms of desegregating U.S. schools. Again, highly recommend if that is a topic that interests you. Then in my academic sphere of reading, I also read Save the Cat Writes a Young Adult Novel by Jessica Brody. That was also part of my 75 Hard Challenge. And then I also read Bird by Anne Lamont, 2 books I highly recommend. I did start reading The Emotional Craft of Fiction by Donald Moss, but I ended up DNFing it around 25 pages in. I felt that the information that I needed wasn't as helpful for me who is writing contemporary YA fiction. I think it is a better book if you are working on literary fiction. I don't consider my craft reading to be a part of my novel reading. I consider it to be a part of my academic reading because I do see craft books as a form of research. Now, last but certainly not least, we have my Korean language learning. So I spent 53.5 hours studying Korean thus far. That is about 2 hours a week, which is an average of 30 minutes a day, which I think is great, especially because Korean continues to kick my butt every time I study. Unfortunately, that is 20 hours less studying that I've accomplished this year than I did last year. But I will also say that I spent 30 days in Korea this past month. And so even though I wasn't studying, I was certainly practicing my Korean in terms of conversation. Obviously, I didn't count those hours, but I would say that the amount of speaking I did definitely was more than 20 hours. And so even though I can't count it as self-study, like actually active studying in the way I've always been counting it, I will definitely say that the practicing was a really important part of what I've wanted to be able to do with my Korean. So even though my numbers aren't on track, I definitely think my skill set is on track. Okay, that is it. That is all that I have for you. Those are all of my mid-year goals. Hopefully, future me will have a end-of-year wrap-up video for you detailing how I did complete and accomplish all of my 2025 goals. But until then, or at least until my next video, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.